Yumeng was a region replete with lakes, so it was only natural that the residents of the most prominent cultivation clan in the area, the Xiang clan of Yumeng, lay amongst the waters. That residence was known as Lotus Pier. If one were to depart Lotus Pier and row along with the current, it wouldn't take long to arrive at the large lake with a suffit of lotuses known as Lotus Lake. Pink blossoms with broad jade-green leaves rose from the depths of the lake, whose waters spanned hundreds of kilometers. When a breeze brushed past, the water swayed and quivered like they were nodding, giving the lovely scenery a sort of charming innocence. Unlike other immortal residences, Lotus Pier was not far removed from the secular world. Ordinary folk were barred from even setting foot on the grand estates of other cultivation clans, but outside Lotus Pier's main entrance were often a variety of small vendors doing roaring businesses in lotus pods, water chestnuts, and all sorts of pastries. Local children with snotty noses also sneaked into the drilling grounds to secretly spy on the disciples' sport training. Even when they were inevitably discovered, they weren't reprimanded. In fact, they were sometimes allowed to play with the Jiansect's disciples. When Wei Wuxian was young, he often shot kites by the shores of Lotus Lake. Xiang kept a keen eye on his own kite, but kept peeking at Wei Wuxian's too. Wei Wuxian's kite was already high in the sky, but he showed no sign of intending to reel it back. He shaded his eyes with his right hand and grinned up at it, seeming to think the kite still hadn't flown far enough. Seeing how his own kite was about to fly out of the range, where he was certain he could shoot it down, Xiang clenched his teeth and knocked an arrow on his bow. He released the bowstring, and the white feathered arrow shot forth with a whizzing noise. His kite was painted to resemble a strange one-eyed monster. When the arrow hit its mark, the kite fell to the earth. Xiang was clearly pleased, and his expression relaxed. "Bullseye!" he exclaimed, then quickly asked, "Yours has already flown afar. Can you still manage to hit it?" Wei Wuxian: "Wanna guess?" He finally pulled out an arrow and aimed. As the bow was drawn to the utmost, he swiftly let go. A hit. Xiang's brows scrunched up again. A came through his nose. All of the boys put away their bows and went to pick up their kites so that they could rank the distances. The closest kite would receive the lowest ranking. Every time, the last one was the Shidi, who was the sixth eldest. As usual, they'd spend more time laughing at him. His face was quite thick though, so he didn't care at all. Wei Wuxian's was the farthest. The closest one to him, the one ranked second, was Xiang's kite. Both Wei Wuxian and Xiang felt too lazy to go fetch the kites. The boys rushed into the winding hallway built over the water surface. They were playing around, jumping up and down, as two young, slender women appeared before them. Both of them were dressed as armed maids, carrying with them short swords. The taller maid, holding a kite and an arrow, blocked their path. She asked coldly, "Whose are these?" All of the boys silently cursed their luck as they saw the two women. Wei Wuxian touched his chin and stepped forward. "They are mine." The other maid snorted. "You're an honest one, aren't you?" They parted and revealed between them a purple-clothed woman also carrying a sword. The woman had creamy skin and was rather beautiful, though her delicate features displayed some fierceness. The corners of her lips lay between a frown and a smile. She was a natural at sneering, just like Xiang. Her flowing purple robes wrapped around her thin waist. Both her face and her right hand, which rested on the hilt of her sword, were as cold as jade stone. A ring embellished with amethyst was worn on the index finger of her right hand. Xiang smiled as he saw her. "Mom!" Meanwhile, the rest of the boys greeted her with respect. "Madame Yu." Madame Yu was Jiang's mother, Yu Yuan. Of course, she was Jiang from Mian's wife and used to cultivate with him as well. Naturally, she should be called Madame Jiang. But for some reason, everyone had always called her Madame Yu. Some people guessed that it was because she didn't want to take on her husband's surname due to her assertive personality. On this matter, neither the husband nor the wife in question had ever argued either. Madame Yu came from the prominent Meishan sect. She was ranked third in her clan, so was also called Third Lady Yu. In the cultivation world, she went by the name Violet Spider. Just bringing up the name could scare quite a few away. Ever since she was young, she'd had a cold personality and never came off as likable when conversing with others. Even after she married Jiang from Mian, she had always been out on night hunts, not overly fond of staying at the Jiang sect's Lotus Pier. On top of that, where she lived at Lotus Pier was different from where Jiang from Mian did. She had her own area where only she and a few of the family members she'd brought from the Yu sect lived. The two young women, Jinshu and Yinshu, were both her trusted mates. They never left her side. Madame Yu gave Jiang sideways glance. "Fiddling about again? Come, let me see you." Jiang went to her side. Madame Yu squeezed his arm with her slender fingers, then slapped his shoulder loudly, scolding. "Not a bit of progress in your cultivation. You're almost 17 and still acting like an ignorant child. Running around with this lot, doing mischief all day. Do you think you're the same as them? Hell knows which gutters they'll be crawling in the future. But you'll be the leader of the Jiang clan." Jiang staggered from the force of a slap. He hung his head, not daring to argue back. Wei Wuxian needed no confirmation to know that she was passive-aggressively insulting him again. One of his shidi secretly stuck his tongue out at him, and Wei Wuxian arched his eyebrows in response. "Weighing? What are you up to now?" As always, Wei Wuxian stepped forward, and Madame Yu continued to scold him. "Acting like this again? Even if you don't strive for any kind of personal improvement, don't drag Jiang into your nonsense and lead him astray. Wei Wuxian looked startled. I don't seek progress? Why? Am I not the one with the most progress in the entire lotus pair? Young people were never too patient. They wouldn't feel satisfied until they talked back. Hearing this, an air of hostility appeared over Madame Mu's forehead. Xiang hastened. Wei Wuxian, shut up. He turned to Madame Mu. It's not that we want to shoot kites in Lotus Pier, but right now, isn't it that none of us are allowed to leave? The Wen sect assigned all of the night hunt areas to itself. Even if I wanted to night hunt, there isn't anywhere for me to go. To stay at home and not go outside to provoke or fight for prey with the Wen sect, isn't this what you yourself made clear to Father? Madame Mu smirked bitterly. I'm afraid that this time, even if you don't want to leave, you'll have to anyway. Xiang didn't understand. Madame Mu didn't pay them any more attention and walked through the hallway holding her chin high. The two maids behind her shot Wei Wuxian fierce glares and followed their mistress away. When evening came, they finally understood what had been meant by, even if you don't want to leave, you'll have to, anyway. It turned out that the Wen sect had ordered for envoys to pass out messages. For the reason that other sects taught badly and wasted talent, the Wen sect demanded all of the sects to each dispatch at least 20 disciples to Xiang within 3 days so that they could let experts teach them. Xiang was shocked. The Wen sect people really said this? They know no shame, do they? Wei Wuxian. Well, they think they are the sun shining above all sects. It's not the first time that the Wen sect is so shameless. Taking advantage of their large sect and strong influence, it had been prohibiting the other sects from night hunting ever since last year. Just how much prey, how much land has it stolen? Men were sitting at the foremost seat. Watch your words and eat. Only 5 of them were seated in the massive hall, each with a small square table laden with dishes in front of them. Wei Wuxian looked down. He had only just moved his chopsticks when he felt a tug on his sleeve and turning, saw Jia Yanli pass him a small plate. There were a number of lotus seeds upon it, the nuts plump and white, fresh and full and freshly peeled just for him. Thanks, Shijie, Wei Wuxian whispered. Jia Yanli responded with a smile which added some vibrant color to her pleasantly unassuming appearance. What food? Yu Si Yuan spat coldly. Who knows if they'll be given anything to eat once they arrive at Xiang? Why not let them starve now so they get used to it? The Wen clan of Xiang's demand was one they could not refuse. There were countless examples of the fate that awaited any clan audacious enough to defy their orders. Such clans were declared guilty of any number of arbitrary criminal charges like rebellion or menace to the cultivation world and then openly and justifiably eradicated. Why so distressed? Xiang Men asked calmly. No matter what the future holds, today's meal still need to be eaten. Madame Mu tried to hold herself back but could not. She smacked her palm on the table. Why so distressed? Because to be distressed is to have sense. How can you be so indifferent at a time like this? Did you not hear what the Wen and Wei said? Their lowly maid dared to act all high and mighty in front of me. The 20 disciples being set must include representatives of the core family. Do you know what that means? Xiang or Ali, one of them must be included. Why are they being sent? For education? Who are the ones to educate at how other sects educate their own juniors? Sending the children placed right into Wen's hands? They'll make hostages of them. Don't be mad, Mom. Xiang tried to interrupt. Just me alone is enough. Of course, you're the one going. Madame Yu scolded him. As if your Gigi can go. Look at her, still peeling lotus seeds so cheerfully. Ali, stop peeling. Why are you peeling them for? You're a lady, not someone's servant. Wei Wuxian heard that pointed word, servant, but didn't care. He gobbled up all the lotus seeds on his plate in one go, mouth filled with refreshing sweetness as he chewed. However, Jiang Fengmian looked up. San Niang, am I mistaken? Madame Yu snapped. You don't like the sound of that word, servant? Let me ask you, Jiang Fengmian, do you plan on having him go? It depends on what he wants. Jiang Fengmian replied. He can go if he wants to. Wei Wuxian raised his hand. I'll go. How lovely, Madame Yu snorted. Go if you want to, but you won't be forced to if you don't. Why is Xiang the one who has to go? Raising someone else's son like this? Sacred Zhan, what a good, generous man you are. There was resentment in her heart, and all she wanted was to set us free. Heedless of whether her venting had either sense or reason. The others remained quiet, letting her blow off steam. San Niangzi, you're tired, said Jiang Fengmian. Why don't you go back and rest? Jiang Chen, still sitting in his own spot, looked up at her. Mom! Madame Yu rose to her feet and sneered. What are you calling me for? Trying to be like your father and tell me to quiet down? You're an idiot. I've already told you. You'll never be able to compare to the one sitting next to you. You can't compete with him even it comes to cultivation, to night hunts, not even shooting a kite. It can't be helped. It's not your fault. Your mom can't compare to someone else's mom after all. If you're no match for him, that's just how it is. Your mom is simply indignant on your behalf. How many times have I told you not to hang around with him? And yet you speak up for him? How did I give birth to a son like you? She stalked out, leaving Jiang Chen sitting there with his complexion turning a myriad of colors. Jiang Yanli quietly placed a plate of peeled lotus seeds on his table. They sat there for a while before Jiang Fengmian broke the silence. I will select another 18 disciples tonight. You will all depart tomorrow. Jiang Chen nodded, hesitant on whether or not he should say anything else. He never knew how to converse with his father, while Wei Wuxian was proficient. Finishing his soup, he replied, Uncle Jiang, don't you have anything to give us? Jiang Fengmian smiled. I've given them long ago. Your swords are by your side, and the adage in your hearts. Wei Wuxian. Oh, to attempt the impossible, right? Xiang immediately warned. This doesn't mean that you should stir up trouble even though you know that you'll make a mess. The air among them finally lifted. The next day, before departure, Xiang from Mian only spoke one sentence after he informed them of the necessities. The disciples of the Human Zhan sect aren't as weak as to crack under just one of the outside world's waves. On the other hand, Jiang Yanli followed them well down the road to see them off to her satisfaction, all the while stuffing everyone's arms full of all sorts of dried foods for fear that they wouldn't be able to fill their stomachs at Zhizhen. The 20 youths departed Lotus Pier heavily laden with food and arrived at the education office designated by Zhizhen before the deadline. A great number of disciples from prominent clans had arrived there, all of them juniors. Of the hundreds present, many were familiar faces. They gathered in groups of 3 to 5 and 7 or 8, conversing in hushed voices. None of them seemed to be in a good mood, so they must have all been summoned in not so polite ways. After looking around, Wei Wuxian commented, "So, people from Gusu came too, as expected." For some reason, the boys sent by the land clan of Gusu all looked rather haggard. Lan Zhan looked especially pale, but still wore the same frosty expression that kept most people at arm's length. With his sword beechen strapped on his back, he stood there all alone with no one else around him. Wei Wuxian wanted to go over and greet him, but Jiang warned, "Don't start anything." So he had to abandon the endeavor. Suddenly, there was someone ahead loudly issuing orders for the disciples to assemble in proper formation before a tall platform. Several Wen sect disciples walked over to below orders. "Quiet! All of you! No talking!" The one standing on the stage wasn't much older than them. He appeared to be about 18 or 19 and clearly considered himself quite important and superior to everyone else present. His face fell on the very outer borders of the realm of handsome, and the airs he put on were as greasy as his hair. This youth was Wen Chao, the youngest son of the Wen clan's leader. Wen Chao loved flaunting himself and took every opportunity to posture before other clans, so his face was not unfamiliar to anyone present. 2 people stood on either side of him. At his left was an ostentatious young woman with a lithe and graceful figure, large eyes, arched brows, and lips as red as fire. The only blemish on her perfection was a black mole that sprouted above her lips in such an awful spot that it made one constantly itch to pick it off. At this right was a man who looked to be 20 or 30 with a tall, broad beard. Indifference shaded his expression, and the air around him was somber and cold. Wen Chao stood high up the slope, looking smugly down at the crowd as he waved his hand. "As of now, you will turn in your swords." Uproar erupted among the gathered disciples. A sword never leaves a cultivator's side, someone protested. Why must we surrender ours? Who said that? Wen Chao demanded. Which clan are you from? Step forward. The one who had spoken held his tongue out of fear. Quiet returned once more below the platform, and Wen Chao was pleased. It's precisely because there are still those of you who don't know etiquette, don't understand subordination, don't comprehend the hierarchy among juniors from prominent clans. You're flawed at the root, and so I have a resolve to educate you. Already, you're so ignorant and fearless. If I don't correct this now, it will result in people vainly challenging the authority of the Wen clan to try and climb above our heads. Everyone knew full well that he demanded their swords with ill intentions. But the Wen clan of Xiang was like the noonday sun, and every other family was teetering on thin ice. No one dared resist them in the slightest. If they should displease the Wen clan in any way, they feared they would be convicted of some crime that would implicate their entire clan. They had no choice but to submit and endure it. Xiang held Wei Wuxian down. Why are you restraining me? Wei Wuxian asked in a low whisper. Xiang snorted. In case you start something. You think too much, Wei Wuxian said. That guy is so slimy. It makes me sick. But if I wanted to punch him, I wouldn't pick a time like this to bring our family grief. Relax. Xiang, you want to stuff him into a bag and beat him up again? I'm afraid that wouldn't work. You see that guy beside Wen Chao? Wei Wuxian. Yes, his cultivation is high, but his youth isn't maintained well enough. Looks like he was a late bloomer. Xiang. His name is Wen Chao, also known as the Co-Melting Hand. His servant kept by Wen Chao's side, specially to protect him. Don't provoke him. Wei Wuxian. The Co-Melting Hand? Xiang. That's right. His pair of palms is quite scary, and he is an aid to the tyrant. Before he helped Wen. The two looked straight ahead as they whispered. Seeing one of the Wen sect servants approach to take away their swords, they were silent at once. With confidence, Wei Wuxian unstrapped his sword and handed it over. At the same time, he couldn't help but glance across at the Gusulan sect side. He originally thought that Lan Zhan would definitely refuse to hand it over. Unexpectedly, even though Lan Zhan's face was frighteningly cold, he unstrapped his sword anyway. The mockery of Madame Mu had become a prophecy. Receiving the indoctrination in Xiang, the meals every day really were blunt. All of the snacks that Jia Yanli had hung around their bodies were taken away long ago. On top of that, among the young disciples, none had practiced in India yet. One couldn't say that it wasn't difficult. The so-called indoctrination of the Xiang sect included only handing out copies of quintessence of the Wen sect, booklets full of the stories and quotes of the Wen sect's past leaders and best cultivators. Everyone had one. They were demanded to memorize them well and keep them in mind at all times. Wen Chao, on the other hand, stood above them every single day. he'd give a speech to everyone and request that they cheer for him, make him the role model to every word, every action. During night hunts, he would bring the disciples with him and make them run at the very front. They'd scout the path, distract the demons and beasts, and battle with all their efforts, while he'd appear at the last moment and easily knock down the prey that had already been beaten to a pulp by others. After he cut off his head, he'd go around boasting that it came from the victory he had achieved alone. If there were anyone whom he found specially displeasing, he'd pull them out and scold them in front of everyone as though said person was lower than even swine. Last year, attending the discussion conference of the Wen sect, Wen Chao also entered the grounds along with Wei Wuxian and the others on the day of the archery competition. He was completely sure that he'd win the first place, thinking that it was only natural for the people to yield to him. As consequence of the first 3 shots, the first was a hit, the second missed, and the third shot down the wrong paper mannequin. He should have accessed the grounds immediately, but he refused to, and the others were hesitant of calling him out. In the end, after the calculations, the 4 with the best results were Wei Wuxian, Lan Zhan, Xuan, and Lan Zhan. If it weren't for having to leave early, Lan Zhan could have done better. Wen Chao felt greatly humiliated, and so he resented these 4 the most. Lan Zhan couldn't come this time, so he was fixated on the other 3, scolding them every day, exhibiting his power. The one who suffered the most was Xuan. He grew up having been cupped within the palms of his parents. He had never undergone such humiliation before. If not for how the other disciples of the Lan Zhan sect stopped him and the fact that Wen Chao wasn't easy to deal with, he would have willingly killed himself along with Wen Chao on the first day. On the other hand, Lan Zhan seemed to be in a state of inner peace and absolute indifference, as though his soul had already risen out of his body. And Wei Wuxian had been through years of Madame Yu's diverse methods of scolding when he was at Lotus Pier. He began to laugh whenever he stepped off the platform, hardly blinking an eye to such moments. Today, as usual, the group was hustled awake by the Wen sect's disciples again. Like a group of livestock, they were driven toward the next destination of their night hunts. The place that they were going this time was called Dusk Creek Mountain. The deeper they went into the forest, the thicker the branches over their heads became, and the larger the shadows below them grew. Aside from the sounds of leaves and footsteps, they couldn't hear anything else. The calls of birds, beasts, and beetles were unusually perceivable amid the silence. After a while, the group met with the creek. Scattered throughout the gurgling water were maple leaves that floated along. The harmony of the sound and the sight imperceptibly diluted the atmosphere of desolation. Bouts of giggling laughter could even be heard from in front of them. Wei Wuxian and Xiang walked while muttering insults at the wind dogs in every way possible. Inadvertently, he turned around, glanced, and saw a figure clothed in white. Lan Zhan was not far away from him. Due to his slow pace, Lan Zhan was toward the back of the line. Within these past few days, there were many times when Wei Wuxian wanted to approach him and catch up on what had been happening. However, Lan Zhan turned away whenever he saw him, and Xiang had also beat it into him not to mess around. Now that they were closer, he couldn't help but pay more attention. Wei Wuxian suddenly realized that although Lan Zhan tried to walk as normally as possible, one could see that his right leg contacted the ground lighter than his left, as though he couldn't put any pressure on it. Seeing this, Wei Wuxian slowed down so that he was beside Lan Zhan. Walking shoulder to shoulder with him, he asked, "What happened to your leg?" Lan Zhan stared straight at the front. "Nothing." Wei Wuxian, "We are already familiar with each other, aren't we?" "How cold! You don't even bother giving me a single look." "Your leg really is fine?" Lan Zhan, "We are not familiar." Wei Wuxian turned around and walked facing the back, determined on making Lan Zhan look at his face. "Don't force yourself if it's not fine. Is your leg hurt or broken? When did it happen?" Just as he was about to say, "Do you want me to carry you?" a fragrant breeze suddenly wafted around his nose. Wei Wuxian turned around and looked to the side. His eyes immediately lit up. Seeing that he had stopped talking abruptly, Lan Zhan followed his gaze. He saw about half a dozen girls walking together. The one in the center wore a layer of chiffon over her coat of pale scarlet. As wind blew across, the chiffon swayed. Her figure looked exceptionally good from the back. This figure was what Wei Wuxian had been looking at. One of the girls laughed. "Mian, your perfume sachet truly is something special. After I wore it, bugs really did stop coming over. The scent is nice too. I seem to feel much more awake after I smell it." The voice of the girl called Mian was indeed soft and sweet. Inside of the sachet is filled with minced medicinal plants. It can be useful in quite a lot of ways. I've still got a few here. Do any of you want one? Wei Wuxian swept over like a foreboding gust of wind. Mian, save me one too." That girl jumped in surprise at a stranger unexpectedly barging into their conversation. She looked back, revealing a pretty face to match her figure. With a slightly furrowed brow, she demanded, "Who are you? Why are you also calling me Mian?" Wei Wuxian smiled. "I heard them call you Mian, so I thought that was your name. What? Is it not?" Lan Zhan looked on with cold indifference. Xiang noticed Wei Wuxian getting up to his usual nonsense again and rolled his eyes dramatically. Mian blushed and exclaimed, "You can't call me that." "Why not?" Wei Wuxian asked. "Why don't we do this then? Tell me your real name and I won't call you Mian. How's that?" "Mian, why do I have to tell you just because you asked? Before you ask for somebody else's name, you should tell them your name first, shouldn't you?" Wei Wuxian, "Sure, if you want my name. Remember, my name is Yuan Dao." Mian silently pronounced the name Yuan Dao a few times. She couldn't remember if the young master of any sect had such a name. But, judging from the boy's air and appearance, she didn't think he was the average disciple. Looking at the teasing smile at the corners of Wei Wuxian's lips, she didn't know what was going on. Suddenly, Lan Zhan's low voice came from beside them. A play on words? She realized at once that it had been taken from the poetry line, "Its ceaseless bounds yearn for miles and miles on," and he was making fun of her. She stomped her feet in spite. "Who's yearning for you? You have no face." The girls collapsed into a laughing mess, chirping, "Wei Wuxian, you really have no face. I've never seen anyone as annoying as you. Let me tell you, she's called..." Mere men dragged them away and turned to leave. Let's go. You can't tell it to him." Wei Wuxian shouted from behind. "You can go, but give me a sachet, won't you? You're ignoring me. You don't want to? If you don't, I'll find other people and ask for your name. There must be someone out there who's willing to tell me." Before he finished, a perfume sachet flew over from in front of him. It landed right in the middle of his chest. With an ouch, Wei Wuxian pretended as though his heart hurt, spinning the sachet around his hand with its ribbon around his finger. Even as he walked back to Lan Zhan, he was still spinning the sachet around, grinning. Watching Lan Zhan's expression grow colder, he asked, "What? You're looking at me like that again?" "Right. Where were we again? Let's continue. How about I carry on my bag?" Lan Zhan looked at him quietly. "Do you behave in such a frivolous way towards everyone?" Wei Wuxian thought for a second. "I think so." Lan Zhan looked at the ground. He only replied a moment later, "How impudent!" He spoke the two words through clenched teeth, along with some strange hatred. He didn't even deem it worthy to give Wei Wuxian another glance. Lan Zhan strained to speed up and walk faster. Seeing that he was forcing himself again, Wei Wuxian hurried. Okay, fine. You don't have to run off. I'll go. All right?" True to his word, he went and caught up with Xiang in a few quick strides. But Xiang wasn't pleasant to him either. He rebuked him savagely. "You're so frivolous." "You're not Lan Zhan? Why are you copying his commentary?" Wei Wuxian asked. "That scowl of his today is the worst it's ever been. What's going on with his leg?" Xiang was slowly. "You don't have time to worry about him. Just mind yourself. Who knows what that idiot Wen Chao is up to, driving us up Mount Mushi to find some cave. I hope whatever he's scheming doesn't go down like that last fight against the tree owl, making us surround the thing like a meat shield." "Of course he looks upset," a sect disciple next to them said in a hushed whisper. "The cloud recesses were set ablaze last month. You guys haven't heard yet, I assume." Wei Wuxian was shocked. "Set ablaze?" Xiang had heard a lot of similar news over the past few days, so he wasn't as surprised. "The Wens did it?" "You could say that," the sect disciple said. "Or you could say the Lans did it themselves." The eldest son of the Wen clan, Wen Chao, went to Gusu and declared the Lan family head guilty of some crime, then forced the Lans to burn down their own residence. They said they were allowing the family to put things in order and be reborn from the flames. Over half of the cloud recesses was reduced to ash, not to mention the surrounding forest. A centuries-old immortal realm destroyed just like that. The Lan clan family head was heavily injured too. We are not even sure if he's alive. The sect disciple trailed off with a sigh. "Does that have anything to do with Lan Zhan's leg?" Wei Wuxian asked. "Of course it does," the sect disciple replied. "The first place Wen Chao ordered them to burn was the library pavilion. He said anyone who disobeyed would be taught a valuable lesson. But Lan Zhan refused to do it, so Wen Chao's subordinates surrounded him and broke one of his legs. They didn't even give him the chance to heal up before dragging him all the way out here. Who knows why they are tormenting us like this?" Wei Wuxian thought back carefully. Over the past few days, when he wasn't enduring Wen Chao's public verbal abuse, Lan Zhan had indeed rarely walked around. He was always either standing still or sitting down and never spoke a word. It was only natural for someone who valued his composure so highly to hide his injury from others. Xiang, noticing Wei Wuxian seemed to be drifting in Lan Zhan's direction again, quickly yanked him to a stop. "What's with you? You still want to mess with him? You're really asking for it." "I'm not going to mess with him," Wei Wuxian said. "Look at his leg. The injury must have gotten worse after all the running around over the past few days. It's only noticeable now because it's gone past the point where he can hide it. If this keeps going, that leg is done for. I'm gonna go carry him." Xiang tightened his grip on Wei Wuxian. "You're not even that close to him. Do you seriously not see how much he hates you? And carry him? He probably doesn't want you anywhere near him." "That's okay. I don't hate him," Wei Wuxian declared. "I'll snatch him up before he sees it coming. What's he gonna do? Choke me to death while I've got him on my back? We can't even take care of ourselves right now. We can't afford to get involved in anyone else's business," Xiang warned. "It doesn't concern us." "Firstly, it does concern us," Wei Wuxian said. "Secondly, someone needs to worry." While the two were quietly arguing, one of the Wen servants came over to yell at them. "You two, don't keep whispering to each other. Watch yourselves." Behind the servant was a beautiful, dainty girl. Her name was Lan Zhan, and she was one of the Wen Chao's personal attendants. No need to specify exactly what kind of personal attendant. Everyone knew. She had been a handmaid in the service of Wen Chao's wife, but thanks to her good looks, had climbed into her master's bed after tossing him a few flirtatious glances. With this inadvertent aid from her mistress, the servant thus rose to a higher position. Her elevation also saw a new name rise among the cultivation clans, the Wang clan of Yingchuan. Hardly a noteworthy name, and yet, thanks to its masters, one that could not be ignored. Her spiritual power was too weak for her to wield a spiritual sword, so she instead carried a long thin branding iron in her hand. Every one servant carried one of these irons. They could brand an excruciatingly painful mark on a victim's body without needing to be heated first. Wang Chao brandished that rod imperiously as she scolded them. Xiao Wanggonsi told the lot of you to search for the cave. What are you whispering about? Such was the current state of the world. They were taking orders from a smug, arrogant handmaid who had fumbled her way to the top by climbing a ladder made of her mistress's bed sheets. The two of them didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Just then, someone shouted, "Found it!" Wang Chao immediately lost interest in the two of them and darted over to see. She cried out in happiness when she laid eyes on what had been discovered. "Wen Chao, we found it! We found the entrance!" It was a well-concealed underground cave hidden at the foot of the old banyan tree, wide enough for 3 grown men to encircle it with their arms. They hadn't found it sooner because the cave's entrance was very small, less than 2 square meters wide, and the tree's bulky roots and vines had formed a robust webbing that all but blocked the hole. There were also withered branches and fallen leaves layered on top, including a blanket of dirt and rocks. It was unusually well hidden. Once the rotted branches and soil had been dug away and the roots chopped clear, the eerie, pitch-black interior yawned open before them. The mouth of the cave led deep underground. Blasts of shiveringly cold air whirled from within, and when someone threw a rock in to test, there was not a sound. It was as if it had sunk into the sea. Wen Chao was overjoyed. "This must be it! Go down, all of you, quick!" Jin Xuan had really had enough of this. "You brought us here saying it was a night hunt for Yao beasts," he spat tersely. "So, might I ask what kind of Yao beast is this exactly? Inform us now, so we can respond to it properly and avoid the last hunt's chaos." "Inform you now?" Wen Chao parroted, sounding offended. He straightened up and pointed at Jin Xuan, then at himself. "How many times do you need me to tell you before you remember? Make no mistake, you are nothing more than my subordinate cultivators. I am the one giving commands. I don't need anyone else to suggest I do anything. Only I can direct operations and mobilize troops, and only I can subdue and defeat Yao beasts." He put particular emphasis on each repetition of "only I." His loud, cocky tone was at once loathsome and ridiculous. "Did you not hear what Wen Chao said?" Wang Chao scolded. "Go down now!" Jin Xuan stood at the very front of the group. Suppressing his anger, he flipped back the hem of his robes, caught a stout-looking vine, and hopped into the bottomless hole without a shred of hesitation. For once, Wei Wuxian could truly empathize with him. Whatever nefarious creatures might reside inside the cave, it would be far more pleasant to deal with them than Wen Chao and his coterie. If Jin Szechuan had to look at that pair of adulterers for even one more second, he really just might carry out his suicidal murder fantasies. One by one, the rest of the group followed after Jin Szechuan and entered the underground cave. With their swords confiscated, the forcibly assembled team of disciples had no choice but to climb down slowly. The tree's vines grew along the dirt wall and were thick as an infant's wrist, making them quite sturdy. Wei Wuxian clung onto a vine and descended slowly, all the while mentally calculating just how deep the hole might be. They slid for over 100 meters before their feet touched solid ground. Wen Chao called after them a few times from above. It was only after he was repeatedly assured it was safe that he mounted his sword and leisurely flew down, hugging Wang Liangjiao around her waist. The Wen disciples and servants landed shortly after him. Hopefully he's not hunting for anything too hard to handle, Jiang Chen muttered under his breath. I wonder if there are any other exits to this place. If whatever Yao beast or other fiend is in here goes berserk, those vines are long enough that they might snap. It won't be easy to escape. The others were all thinking the same thing. Worry seized their minds, and they unconsciously looked up at the bright opening of the cave. It looked very small from down here. Wen Chao dismounted his sword and barked at them. What are you all standing there for? Do you need me to teach you what to do? Go! The group of youths were thus driven into the depths of the cave. Since they were scouting ahead, Wen Chao deigned to have his servants give them a few torches. The domed ceiling of the underground cave was high and empty, untouched by the weak light. Wei Wuxian paid close attention to the way sound echoed around them. It seemed the deeper they went, the more cavernous the reverberations sounded. They were probably at least 300 meters underground. The scouts at the front were on high alert, their torches raised high. An unknown amount of time passed before they finally came upon a fathomless lake as vast as any that could be found above ground. The waters were dark and tranquil, and rocky islets of various sizes pockmarked the surface. There was no other path leading out, but even though they were now at a dead end, their night hunt prey hadn't shown itself. They still didn't even know what it was. Heavy clouds of uncertainty loomed over everyone's heads, leaving them tense and on edge. Irritated that the anticipated Yao beast hadn't been found, Wen Chao swore a couple of times. Then an idea hit him. String someone up overhead. Blast the thing out by spilling their blood. Beasts usually craved blood more than anything. It'd definitely be lied out by the scent of the blood and the immobilized human being hanging mid-air. Wang Liangjie answered and immediately pointed to a girl. She ordered, "How about her?" The girl was the one who gave out perfume sachet on their way here, Mian Mian. Suddenly, having been chosen, her mind went completely blank. Although this choice of Wang Lianqiu's appeared random, she'd actually been planning it for a long time. Most of the people that the sects sent here were boys. Thus, toward the few girls, Wen Chao couldn't help but pay more attention, especially Mian Mian. She looked fair and had been harassed a few times by Wen Chao, though could only suffer in silence. Yet, Wang Lianqiu had seen and loathed everything. The realization that she'd been chosen as bait really hit her then. Mian Mian snapped out of it and staggered backward with a terrified expression. When Wen Chao saw who Wang Lianqiu had picked, regret washed over him. He hadn't had the chance to truly taste her yet. "That one? Why don't we choose someone else?" "But why?" Wang Lianqiu whined, sounding aggrieved. "I want this one. Do you not want her to be picked?" The moment she played the coquette, Wen Chao went weak and giddy with lurid excitement. He took another look at Mian Mian's clothing. She was definitely not a proper clan junior, but a sect disciple at most. She was more than suitable to be bait. Even if she died, no clan worthy of note would raise a fuss. "What are you saying? What's there to complain about? Jiao Jiao gets to call all the shots. She can do whatever her little self wants." Mian Mian knew that once she was strung up, there was almost no chance she'd come back down alive. Panicked, she fled about the cave, but no matter where she tried to flee, the people there would scatter away. Wei Wuxian had barely moved a muscle but was immediately held down firmly by Jianzhen. Suddenly, Mian Mian noticed that there were two disciples who had not backed away from her but remained steadfastly still. She quickly ran to hide behind them, shaking in fear. Those two disciples were Jin Xishuan and Lan Zhan. The Wen servants trying to seize Mian Mian, so the two of them clearly didn't intend to move. "Step aside!" they barked. Lan Zhan's only response was silence and indifference. Noticing the situation turning sour, Wen Chao warned them. "What are you two standing there for? Do you not understand human words? Or are you trying to save the damsel in distress?" Jin Xishuan raised his eyebrows. "Are you done? Was it not enough to have others be your meat shields? Now you want a living person to be your bloody bait?" Wei Wuxian was slightly shocked. That Jin Xishuan actually has some guts. Wen Chao pointed at them accusingly. "Is this a revolt? I'm warning you. I've tolerated you for a long time. Take action immediately. Trust that girl up. Otherwise, no one your clan sent along with you will be going home." Jin Xishuan sneered and didn't move a muscle. Lan Zhan also acted as if he heard nothing, as tranquil as if he were in a meditative state. However, there was a sect disciple from the Lan clan of Guzu who had been trembling as he listened to Wen Chao's threats. Unable to endure any longer, he charged over and seized Mian Mian to bind her. Before he could succeed, Lan Zhan's brow furrowed sharply and he struck out with his palm. That single strike sent the boy hurtling away. Although Lan Zhan did not speak a single word, the look he gave that sect disciple projected immense power in itself, and its meaning was more than obvious. It is truly a disgrace that the Lan clan of Guzu has a sect disciple such as you. The sect disciple's shoulders were shaking as he slowly backed away, powerless to meet any of the eyes staring at him from all around. Wei Wuxian whispered to Xiang. "Jeez, Lan Zhan's temper is gonna get him in trouble." Xiang clenched his fists. There was probably no staying out of the situation at this point. It was delusional to hope that no blood would be shed. Wen Chao flew into a rage. "This is mutiny! Kill them both!" A number of Wensack disciples drew their shining swords and charged at Lan Zhan and Jin Xishuan. All the while, co-melting hand Wen Chulu stood motionless behind Wen Chao with his hands clasped behind his back, as if he thought he didn't need to participate. Which was essentially true. The fight was few against many, and the two boys had no weapons. They were at a disadvantage in the first place and terribly exhausted by endless toil to boot. Furthermore, Lan Zhan was injured. They wouldn't last long. Wen Chao's mood lifted as he watched his subordinates fight the pair. He clicked his tongue. "Who do they think they are? Defying me? People like that deserve death." "Yeah," a voice laughed cheekily. "Those who abuse their family's influence in order to oppress others and boldly commit crimes all deserves death. And not just death, beheading, with their heads put on display to be cursed at by millions, serving as a warning to future generations." Upon hearing this, Wen Chao whirled around. "What did you say? Do you need me to repeat myself?" Wei Wuxian looked astonished. "All right then. Those who abuse their family's influence in order to oppress others and boldly commit crimes all deserve death. And not just death, beheading, with their heads put on display to be cursed at by millions, serving as a warning to future generations. Did you catch it this time?" Wen Chulu shot Wei Wuxian's a pensive look. Wen Chao, on the other hand, was simply outraged. "What a load of crap! You dare to such treasonous, arrogant nonsense?" Wei Wuxian first lifted the corners of his mouth with a pff, then immediately burst into unbridled laughter. Under everyone's shocked eyes, he laughed so hard that he was out of breath, clutching Jiangchen's shoulder as he spoke. "Absurd? Outrageous? I'd say you are the one who is all of those. Wen Chao, do you know who was the one that said those words? I'm sure you don't, do you? Let me tell you. This is said by the most famous cultivator of your sect, the one who founded the entire thing, Wen Chao. You dared say that one of your ancestors' remarks are absurd and outrageous? Well said, well said. Within the quintessence of the Wen sect that had been given out, even the most ordinary of small talk commands could be analyzed over and over, their deep meanings boasted with exceptional extravagance. Let alone memorizing it well, Wei Wuxian felt disgusted after just flipping through its pages. However, he found this quote of Wen Chao's quite ironic, which was why he could recall it with ease. Wen Chao's complexion switched between red and white. Wei Wuxian added, "Right. What was the accusation given to those who insult famous cultivators of the Wen sect again? How should they be punished? I remember that it was execution, right? Yes, very well. You can go die now." Wen Chao couldn't hold himself back any longer, unsheathing his sword and lunging at Wei Wuxian. With that, he lunged out of Wen Chulu's range of protection. Wen Chao had always been used to defending against the attacks of others. He had never expected Wen Chao to live by his own will. Facing the sudden difficulty, he somehow couldn't react in time. On the other hand, as Wei Wuxian provoked Wen Chao, he was precisely waiting for the moment of uncontrollable rage. The smile by his lips didn't falter at all as he attacked with the speed of lightning. In a split second, he had snatched the sword and reversed the situation, subduing Wen Chao with just one move. One hand gripping Wen Chao, he leaped a few times and landed on one of the islets above the pool, keeping his distance from Wen Chao. With his other hand, he pressed the sword onto Wen Chao's neck, warning, "Nobody move! If you're not careful, I might just decide to let some blood out of your young master Wen." Wen Chao screeched, "Stop moving! Stop moving!" The disciples surrounding Lan Zhan and Jin Xuan finally ceased their attacks. Wei Wuxian shouted, "Co-melting hand, you're not moving either. You know how the temper of the mxtx leader is? Your master is in my hand. If he loses just one drop of blood, then not one of the people here should hope to live on, including you." Wen Chao put his arms down as Wei Wuxian had expected. Seeing that the situation was under control, Wei Wuxian was about to speak when he suddenly felt that the entire grove below him had trembled. He was on guard at once. "Jiangchen, is it an earthquake?" They were currently inside of an underground cave. If an earthquake or a landslide happened, it'd be extremely terrifying whether their entrance was blocked or they were buried alive. Yet Jiangchen replied, "No." Even so, Wei Wuxian felt the ground shaking harder. The jolts made the blade of the sword bump Wen Chao's throat several times, prompting his horrible shrieking. "It's not the ground shaking!" Jiangchen yelled to him. "It's that thing under your feet!" Wei Wuxian had noticed too. The tremors didn't come from the ground, but from the rock islet he had landed on. And not only was it shaking, it was rising higher and higher, more and more of it breaking through the surface of the water. He finally realized that this wasn't an islet. It was a massive creature that had been lurking submerged in the deep waters, and he was currently standing on its back. The rock islet moved speedily toward the shore. The approach of the unknown Yao beast brought with it a formless dread. Only a handful of those present stood firm, among them Lan Zhan, Jin Xuan, Jiangchen, Wen Chao, and a few others. The rest reeled backward, scrambling away. But just as they thought the thing under the water was about to erupt from the lake, it stopped. Wei Wuxian didn't dare move carelessly, since jumping onto its back had roused the Yao beast from its deep slumber. He held his ground, waiting quietly to see what would happen. Several maple leaves, unusually vivid in color, floated leisurely past them on the surface of the pitch-black waters surrounding the rock islet. Below those leaves, deep in the black depths, something gleamed like a pair of brass mirrors. That pair of brass mirrors grew bigger and bigger, closer and closer. "Oh no!" Wei Wuxian cried mentally and dragged Wen Chao back a couple of steps. There was a sudden tremor beneath his feet, and the rock islet rose high into the air. A humongous, swarthy head broke through the water's leaf-speckled surface. With screams of alarm both high and low echoing around it, the Yao beast slowly twisted its neck and fixed its huge eyes on the two humans on its back. The round head of the beast appeared rather strange, similar to both a turtle's and a snake's. Simply looking at its head, it'd be more like a gigantic snake, but looking at its body, which had largely risen out of the water already, it seemed more of a Wei Wuxian. What a huge tortoise! This wasn't the average tortoise. If the tortoise were to crash onto the lotus spear's training ground, its shell alone could fill up the entire martial arts field. Even 3 burly men wouldn't be able to put their arms around its dark crown. Much less, the average tortoise could extend out of its shell a snake's long winding head, within it a full mouth of yellow crisscrossed fangs, let alone grow 4 sharp claws that seemed quite agile. Wei Wuxian met the pair of large golden eyes. Its pupil was just a slit, its thickness shifting, as though its eyes were switching in and out of focus, not completely able to tell what exactly was on its back. It seemed that the beast had eyesight of a snake as well, not too good. As long as they didn't move, maybe it wouldn't be able to notice. Suddenly, 2 streams of water vapor shot out of its hole-like nostrils. The maple leaves that had been floating in the water just happened to be near its nose. It spurted out the air, likely because they were itching it. Wei Wuxian was still motionless, standing as if he was a statue. But the slight movement scared the life out of Wen Chao. Wen Chao knew that the beast craved slaughter more than anything. Seeing that it suddenly shot vapor from its nose, he thought that it was about to go into a rage. Disregarding the sword by its neck, he screamed toward Wen Chao, who was at the show. "Why aren't you helping me yet? Help me now! What are you waiting for?" Xiang cursed through clenched teeth. That idiot! Among the 2 strange things before its eyes, one suddenly started twitching like a worm and let out ear-piercing sounds. The beast was provoked at once. Its snake-like head pulled back quickly before immediately springing up. Its yellow and black fangs parted wide as it lunged for its back. Wei Wuxian flicked his arm. Wen Chao's sword flew with the speed of an arrow toward where the heart of the beast should be. However, as it was covered in black scales, the head of the beast was as hard as armor. As though it had hit a piece of iron, the blade of the sword sent off a trail of sparks with a clang before it plummeted into the water. The beast seemed to hesitate. Its large eyeballs turned down to look at the slender object that glowed even when it was underwater. Grabbing the opportunity, Wei Wuxian pushed down with his legs and leaped into the air along with Wen Chao onto one of the other islets, thinking to himself, "Please don't tell me that this one is a huge tortoise as well." Suddenly, he heard Xiang call out, "Watch your back! The core-melting hand is coming!" Wei Wuxian spun around only to see a pair of large hands loom over him without a sound. Involuntarily, he struck out to fend against Wen Chou's attack. He could feel a power come from Wen Chou, unusually forceful and dark, as though something was about to be sucked out of his arm. Wei Wuxian instinctively took his hand back, while Wen Chao used the chance to snatch Wen Chao away, landing back on the shore. Wei Wuxian cursed under his breath and followed them to the shore. All of the Wen sect's disciples took down the bows that had been on their backs and retreated as they aimed at the beast. Arrows shot through the air as though they were rain, clinking as they hit the beast's scales and its shell. Sparks flew everywhere. Although the battle appeared to be quite intense, in reality there was no use. Not a single arrow had proven a fatal hit. They did nothing more than scratch the beast's edges. The large head waved left and right. The skin outside of its shells seemed to be black rocks filled with lumps. Even if arrows hit, they couldn't go any deeper. Wei Wuxian watched one of the disciples pant as he set an arrow onto his bow. Struggling to draw the bow, he just couldn't pull it all the way back. Finally, unable to tolerate it, Wei Wuxian grabbed the bow and kicked the disciple to the side. 3 arrows were left in the quiver. He set them onto the bow all at once, drew the string to the fullest and aimed. The string of the bow quivered by its ear. Just as he was about to let go, a cry suddenly came from behind him. The cry was full of fear. Turning round, Wei Wuxian saw Wang Chao give orders to 3 servants. 2 of them brutishly held Mian in place, clenching her face, while the other raised the branding iron in his hand and thrusted it toward her face. The tip of the iron was so heated that it sizzled and shone with red light. Wei Wuxian was some distance away from them. Seeing what was happening, he immediately shifted the direction of the arrows and let go of the string. The 3 arrows shot out at once and hit each of the 3 people. Without making a noise, they fell backward onto the ground. Yet, before the bowstring even ceased to vibrate, Wang Chao suddenly grabbed the iron that had fallen as well. Gripping Mian's hair, she again showed it toward her face. Even though Wang Chao's level of cultivation was extremely low, her move was both swift and cruel. If she really did it, even if Mian could keep her eye, her face would be completely ruined. A woman like her, even under such dangerous circumstances where people were prepared to flee at a moment's notice, still kept her persistent thoughts of harming others. All of the other disciples were setting up their arrows, handling the beast with all of their attention. Nobody was near these 2. There were no more arrows on Wei Wuxian's, and there wasn't enough time to grab someone else's. Under the urgency of these circumstances, he rushed over, one hand striking away the arm that Wang Chao grabbed Mian's hair with, and the other landing forcefully at her chest. Having undertaken the strike, Wang Chao heaved up a mouthful of blood and flew backward. However, the tip of the iron had already pressed onto Wei Wuxian's chest. Wei Wuxian caught the odor of clothing and skin being scorched, along with the horrifying scent of cooked meat. Below his collarbone, near his heart, came a pain that drowned out everything else. He gritted his teeth, but still couldn't hold back the aching roar, finally letting it out of his throat. His strike wasn't in the least soft. Wang Xiao flew out, blood spurting everywhere, and wailed as soon as she hit the ground. Jiang Chen's palm went toward the crown of her head. Wen Chao screeched, "Jiao Jiao! Jiao Jiao! Quick, save Jiao Jiao!" Wen Chu brow wrinkled, but he made no comment. He swiftly leaped over, fought Jiang Chen off, and returned with Wang Xiao dangling from one hand. He tossed her at Wen Chao's feet. Wang Xiao threw himself into Wen Chao's arms, yowling at the top of her lungs and coughing blood all the while. Jiang Chen caught up with them and faced Wei Wuxian. Wen Chao saw his frightening expression, both eyes bloodshot, and that all the other disciples were thrown into chaos. Not to mention the fact that the enormous Yao beast had finally set its left front claw onto the lake's shore. Now, Wen Chao finally felt fear. "Withdraw! Withdraw!" he cried out. "Withdraw immediately!" His subordinates had been struggling to hang on, not so patiently waiting for their great leader to call for retreat. As soon as they heard the command, they mounted their swords and flew off. Wen Chao's sword had been thrown into the water by Wei Wuxian, so he snatched one from another and hopped on with Wang Xiao in his arms. He immediately shot off with a swoosh, disappearing without a trace. The Wen servants and disciples followed closely after him. "Stop the fight!" Jin Sishuan barked. "Let's go!" The group of disciples had no desire to stick around and fight this rock mountain of a beast. They dashed like mad back to the cave's opening, but when they arrived, they saw the vine they had used to climb down was coiled on the ground like a dead snake. Jin Sishuan flew into a rage. "Shameless, damn crooks! They cut the vine!" Without the vine, there was no way they could climb up this steep earthen wall. The opening was over 100 meters above their heads, and the daylight that winked down at them blinded their eyes. The next moment, this light was extinguished by half, like a tiango eating the moon. "They are blocking the hole!" someone exclaimed in alarm. As soon as he said so, the remaining half of the light was snuffed out. Trapped deep underground, the only light that remained came from the burning torches that illuminate the lost, confused, and speechless young faces. It was a good moment before Jin Sishuan's cursing shattered the dead silence. "Those cheaters really went and did it!" "It's okay if we can't get out," one of the boys mumbled. "My father and mother will come find me. When they hear of this, they'll definitely come search for us here." A scattered few agreed, but someone else immediately replied, voice trembling. "They still think we are being educated in Chizhen. Why would they come look for us? Besides, the Wens won't tell people the truth after they ran off. They'll definitely fabricate some excuse. We'll have no choice but to stay down here. We can only stay in this underground cave without food in the company of a Yao beast." At that moment, Jiang Chen slowly walked over, supporting Wei Wuxian as he went. They just happened to catch the "without food" remark, and so Wei Wuxian had to add his commentary. "Jiang Chen, I got a chunk of cooked meat right here. You want it?" "Screw off! Not even that branding iron could kill you. Xiang berated. Is this really the time for your nonsense? You have no idea how badly I want to sew your mouth shut. Lan Zhan's light-colored eyes fell on them. Then his gaze moved to Mian Mian. She was following Xiang and Wei Wuxian, looking at a loss. Her face was scrunched up and stained with tears, and her hands twisted her skirts as she sniffled, sobbed, and repeatedly uttered apologies. Wei Wuxian covered his ears and sighed. Can you please stop crying? I'm the one that got burned, not you. Do you want me to comfort you? Why don't you comfort me instead? Pretty please. All right, Xiang, that's enough of you holding me around. It's not like I broke a leg. The girls present all surrounded Mian Mian and wept along with her. Withdrawing his gaze, Lan Zhan doubled back in the direction of the lake. Larganza, where are you going? Xiang asked. That Yaobi is still guarding the lake. I am returning to the lake, Lan Zhan replied. A way out lies there. When the others heard there was a way out of here, the weeping abruptly stopped. A way out? Wei Wuxian asked. There are maple leaves in the water, Lan Zhan stated. That sounded like a non-sequitur, but Wei Wuxian immediately understood. There were maple leaves floating in the waters of the Black Lake where the Yao beast was entrenched. But there were no maple trees inside or outside the cave, only banyan trees next to the cave's opening. There was also no trace of human activity, but the maple leaves in the water were fresh and vivid as fire. And when they were hiking up the mountain earlier, they had seen maple leaves carried by the current of a small stream. It was clicking for Xiang as well. There might be a tunnel at the bottom of the lake that's connected to an outside water source, which is how the maple leaves from the mountain streams get in. Someone timidly spoke up. But how do we know if the tunnel is big enough for people to squeeze through? What if it's very small? What if it's only a crack? And that Yao is still guarding the lake. Jin Sishuan frowned and refusing to move. Wei Wuxian lifted the lapel of his robe, one of his hands fanning at the wound under his clothes. If there's hope, then let's move. No matter what, it's better than waiting for our parents here and doing nothing. So what if it's watching over the pool? We can just lure it out. After some negotiation, a while later, the group of boys again went off the same way they had come. Hiding in a hole within the cave, they quietly peeped at the beast. Most of its body was still soaked in the pool. The long body of a snake extended from its turtle shell. It approached the shore, opened its jaw, and softly clenched the corpse between its teeth before it shrunk back, dragging the corpse back into its dark, castle-like shell. It was as though it wanted to savor it in there. Wei Wuxian tossed out a torch. It crashed into the corner of the cave. The sound was specially exaggerated within the dead silence of the underground. The head of the beast slid out of its shell at once. Its thin pupils reflected the eagerly burning torch. Instinctively attracted to things that gave light and heat, it slowly extended its neck out. Behind it, Xiang noiselessly dove into the water. The Xiang clan of Yunmeng lived by the waters, and their disciples were all exceptional swimmers. The few ripples produced by the action dispersed as soon as Xiang went under. The group stared intently at the surface of the water but glanced up at the Yao beast every so often. The giant black snake head was hesitantly circling the torch, undecided about whether to approach. The sight made the youths increasingly nervous. The Yao beast finally decided to test what the torch was made of. It nudged its nose closer, which only resulted in it getting licked by searing flames. The creature immediately snapped its neck back and blew two furious streams of air from its nostrils, which extinguished the torch. Right at the moment, Xiang resurfaced from the water and drew in a deep breath. The Yao beast sensed the intrusion on its territory and swiveled its head, then twisted its body back toward Xiang. Seeing things going awry, Wei Wuxian bit down on its finger, then swiftly drew a few sloppy characters on the center of its palm. He rushed out of the tunnel and slapped the ground. The moment his palm left the earth, a column of flames taller than the man surged from the ground. Startled, the Yao beast gazed in its direction, and Xiang took the chance to swim ashore. "There's a tunnel at the bottom of the lake. It's not small," he said. "How small is not small?" Wei Wuxian asked. 4, 5 people can get through at once," Xiang exclaimed. "Everyone, listen here," Wei Wuxian shouted to the crowd. "Follow right behind Xiang into the water and into the tunnel. Everyone who's still in good shape, take care of the injured. Those who can swim, take care of those who can't. 5 or 6 can go through at a time, so don't get pushy. Now go." As he spoke, the flame column gradually died out. Wei Wuxian retreated a dozen steps back in a different direction, then struck the ground again to erupt another column of fire. The giant golden eyes of the Yao beast glowed red from the flame's reflection and burned with madness as it flexed its claws. It dragged its mountainous body in Wei Wuxian's direction. "What are you doing?" Xiang shouted angrily. "What are you doing?" Wei Wuxian snapped back. "Take them and go!" He had successfully lured the Yao beast into shore. When should they go, if not now? Xiang clenched his teeth. "Everyone, come over here," Xiang ordered. "Those who can swim, stand on the left. Those who can't, on the right." Wei Wuxian was observing the terrain as he fled around, setting off flames. Suddenly, a sharp pain stabbed through his arm. He looked down to see he had been shot by an arrow. As it turned out, the Lan Zhan disciple whom Lao Wenji had glared at earlier had found a bow and arrow abandoned by the Wens and tried to shoot at the Yao beast. Perhaps because of the beast's fearsome savagery and agility, the boy's hands were panicked and unsteady, and the shot had flown astray and pierced Wei Wuxian instead. Wei Wuxian had no time to pull it out, he struck the ground again, calling forth another surge of flames. "Back off! Don't make more work for me!" The sack disciple had wanted to fell the Yao beast with a single shot to its vital spot, in hopes of regaining some of the face he'd lost earlier. Who could have thought it would turn out like this? His face flushed progressively paler as he fled into the water. Xiang urged Wei Wuxian, "Get over here! Hurry!" "Be right there," Wei Wuxian said. Xiang still had 3 disciples with him who couldn't swim, but they were the last group left. They couldn't delay any longer, they had to dive now. Wei Wuxian tore the arrow out of his arm before it abruptly hit him. "Oh no!" The resulting smell of blood greatly excited the Yao beast. Its neck suddenly grew in length and its mouth gaped wide with fangs. Before Wei Wuxian could think of what to do, he was shoved by someone and sent tumbling. Lan Zhan had pushed him away. The jaws of the Yao beast closed in one smooth motion on Lan Zhan's right leg. Just watching this happen, Wei Wuxian felt pain spark in his own leg, but Lan Zhan was, shockingly, still expressionless. All he did was slightly wrinkle his brow. But the Yao beast immediately started dragging him backward. Judging by the creature's size and the crushing power of its fangs, it could bite a person in half like it was nothing at all. Thankfully, it didn't seem like to eat things that were broken into chunks. Once it had caught its prey, it was quite adamant in dragging it back into its shell to savor at its leisure. But if it only bit down a little harder, Lan Zhan's leg would snap right off. Its tortoise shell was incomparably tough. No weapon could penetrate it. Once it took Lan Zhan in there, he could forget about coming back out. Wei Wuxian broke into a mad dash and lunged before the beast's head fully shrank back into the shell, managing to catch one of the fangs in its upper jaw. Originally, he wasn't anywhere near strong enough to grapple with a monster like this. But with a life on the line, a horrifying and inhuman power surged through him. Pushing against the tortoise shell with both feet, he gripped that tooth firmly and wedged himself there like a stopper, not allowing it to shrink back, denying it the chance to enjoy its delicious meal. Lan Zhan, who had never imagined Wei Wuxian could catch up in such circumstances, was entirely dumbfounded. Wei Wuxian feared that if the Yao beast threw a fit, it'd either eat them both alive or tear Lan Zhan's leg off. He continued to grip the sharp upper tooth with its right hand while his left seized at the tooth in the beast's lower jaw. He then forced his arms in opposite directions with all his might. Veins bulged on his forehead, practically bursting on his bright red face. Gradually, the 2 rows of fangs clamped onto Lan Zhan's flesh were forced apart. With the creature's fangs no longer able to hold its prey in place, Lan Zhan dropped into the lake. Wei Wuxian's god-like strength abruptly vanished at the sight. He released his grip, unable to hold on, and the 2 rows of crooked fangs snapped violently together with a sound as deafening as the hardest of stones colliding. Wei Wuxian fell into the water next to Lan Zhan. He flipped around, scooped Lan Zhan close, and then hauled them both out of the harm's way with one arm, swimming meters in a flash and leaving a long, beautiful wave behind them. Tumbling onto the shore, he hauled Lan Zhan onto his back and bolted. "You?" Lan Zhan blurted out. "Me?" Wei Wuxian confirmed. "Surprise!" "What surprise?" Sprawled on Wei Wuxian's back, Lan Zhan had a rare and obvious disturbance in his tone. "Let me down!" Wei Wuxian's mouth didn't take a break but kept pace, even as they ran for their lives. "Wouldn't I look bad if I let you down just because you asked?" The roar of the Yao beast behind them reverberated painfully in their ears and chests, and they felt blood surging up their throats. Wei Wuxian finally shut up and concentrated on escape. To prevent the Yao beast from rampaging after them, he scurried through narrow holes and chose paths its tortoise shell couldn't squeeze into. He lost track of time as he ran, holding his breath, and didn't slow his pace until he could no longer hear the creature. Wei Wuxian relaxed and let himself slow. He smelled blood. When he reached back, his right hand returned wet with it. "Oh no," Wei Wuxian thought. "Lan Zhan's injury is going to get even worse." Figuring he'd run far enough that they'd made it somewhere safe, he hurriedly turned around and set Lan Zhan gently on the ground. Lan Zhan's leg had already been injured when it was mauled by the Yao beast and then soaked in water. Large patches of blood stained his white robes crimson, and there were rows of visible puncture holes from the fangs. He was unsteady, barely able to stand. The moment Wei Wuxian let go of him, he tumbled onto its backside. Wei Wuxian leaned down and checked him over for a moment before straightening up to search the underground cave. There were a few shrubs around, and with difficulty he found some thick and straight branches. He used a corner of his clothing to scrub the dirt off them and then squatted in front of Lan Zhan. "You got any rope or string on you?" "Oh, your forehead ribbon looks like it'll do the trick. Come, take it off." Wei Wuxian didn't wait for Lan Zhan to respond before he swiftly reached out and plucked said ribbon free. He flicked it out once, then straightened Lan Zhan's disaster-prone leg before firmly splinting the limb to the branches, using the ribbon like a bandage to tie everything in place. So suddenly stripped off his forehead ribbon by Wei Wuxian, Lan Zhan's eyes widened. "You?" Wei Wuxian's nimble hands had already tied the knot. He patted Lan Zhan's shoulder to console him. "What about me? Let's not fuss about it at a time like this. As much as you like that ribbon, it's not as important as your leg, right?" Lan Zhan leaned back, either too tired to sit up or simply angered speechless by his words. Suddenly, Wei Wuxian caught a faint herbal scent. Reaching into his lapel, he fished out a small sachet of perfume. The wet sachet hung from its tassels, delicate yet somewhat pitiful. Recalling how Mian Mian said that it was filled with medicinal plants, he opened it up at once and found that there were indeed herbs, along with a few small flowers, half dried and quite chopped up. He urged, Lan Zhan, stop sleeping. Sit up for 1 second. There's a perfume sachet here. See if there are any herbs that we can use. Dragging and tugging and refusing to give up, he eventually made Lan Zhan sit up, however exhausted he was. After looking through the herbs, they really did find a few that could stop blood or remove poison. Wei Wuxian spoke as he picked them out. I can't believe that the girl's perfume sachet ended up so useful. I'll have to thank her properly when we go back. Lan Zhan responded coldly. Are you sure you do not mean to harass her properly? Wei Wuxian. What are you talking about? It doesn't count as harassing if I'm the one doing it. It only counts if the one doing it looks as greasy as Wen Chao. Gone. Strip. Lan Zhan frowned slightly. What? Wei Wuxian. What do you think? Strip your clothes. He did exactly what he said. Hands grabbing each of Lan Zhan's lapels, he peeled them to the side, revealing a chest and shoulders the color of snow. Lan Zhan had suddenly been pushed onto the ground, shirt forcibly stripped. His face was almost green. Wei Ying, what do you want to do? Wei Wuxian took off all of his clothes and tore them to shreds. What do I want to do? Right now, we two are the only ones here. I'm already making it so obvious. What do you think I want to do? As he finished, he stood up and drew away his belt sash. As though reciprocating out of courtesy, he revealed his own chest as well. With deep-set collarbones, the lines of his torso flowed smoothly. Although it almost flaunted its adolescence, it was full of youthful energy and strength. Watching his movements, Lan Zhan's complexion switched between pale, dark, and flustered. His blood seemed to boil to the point of having to burst out from between his lips. Wei Wuxian smiled and walked 1 step closer. Right in front of Lan Zhan's face, he took off his own drenched coat. He raised it up with one hand before releasing his grip, letting it fall to the ground. Wei Wuxian shrugged, palms facing out. Now that the shirts are gone, it's time for the trousers. Lan Zhan wanted to get up, but his leg was injured. Due to the fight they had gone through and the fury within him, the more anxious he was, the more he couldn't do it. His entire body felt worn out. With an intense rage, he really did cough up a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Wei Wuxian immediately squatted down and tapped a few of the acupoint on his chest. There, now all that bad blood is out. You're welcome. Having coughed up the purple-black blood, Lan Zhan immediately felt the nauseating, suffocating pain in his chest recede. When he reflected on Wei Wuxian's actions, it finally dawned on him. After entering Mount Moshi, Wei Wuxian had realized that Lan Zhan didn't look well. There must have been pent-up qi in his chest, and so Wei Wuxian had deliberately terrorized him, riling him into coughing up the blood he'd been holding back. Although Lawanchi knew he'd acted with good intentions, he still seemed a bit peeved. "Can you not play such pranks again? Bottling up things like that in your heart is bad for your health," Wei Wuxian argued back. "But they're easily expelled with a scare. Don't worry, I'm not into guys. I won't take this chance to try anything with you." "Frivolous," Lawanchi exclaimed. Wei Wuxian found out long ago that Lawanchi's temper was especially bad today. He didn't protest any further and waved his hand. Okay. Ridiculous it is. I'm ridiculous. I'm the most ridiculous there is." As he spoke, the cold underground air climbed up his spine, causing him to shudder. He immediately stood up, gathered a pile of dead leaves and branches, and drew the fire talisman on his palm again. The leaves and branches scrunched into flames, letting off a few sparks once in a while. Wei Wuxian ground up the herbs that he had picked out. Ripping the trouser leg open, he sprinkled them evenly over the 3 hideous holes that had just barely ceased to bleed. Suddenly, Lawanchi raised his arm and stopped him. Wei Wuxian asked, "What's wrong?" Without speaking a word, Lawanchi took out some of the herbs from his palm and pressed them onto Wei Wuxian's chest. Wei Wuxian's entire body trembled as he exclaimed, "Ah!" He had forgotten that there was a fresh wound on himself as well, created by the iron. It was also still bleeding and had also been soaked in water. Lawanchi took his hand away. Wei Wuxian hissed a few times, then peeled away, bit by bit, the herbs that had been pressed onto his chest, tossing them into Lawanchi's leg again. "Don't mind me. I get hurt a lot, and I play in the Lotus Lake as usual, even when I'm hurt. I got used to it a long time ago. How many herbs there can be inside a small perfume sachet? There isn't enough to begin with. I think that those 3 holes of yours need them more. Ah!" Lawanchi's face was dark. A moment later, he replied, "If you know that it hurts, do not be rash next time." Wei Wuxian, "It's not like I had any other choice, right? Do you think I enjoy being burned? Who would have known that Wang Liangqiao is so heartless? She almost pressed the iron into the eye. Mian Mian is a girl, and quite a pretty girl at that. If she was blind in an eye, or such a thing gets onto her face, it wouldn't be able to come off for the rest of her life. How bad would that be?" Lawanchi spoke in a thin voice. "The thing on your body right now will not be able to come off for the rest of your life either." Wei Wuxian, "That's different. It's not on the face, and I'm a man. What am I scared of? In a man's life, how can he not get a few wounds and earn a few scars?" Still bare-chested, he squatted on the ground and picked up a branch to poke at the fire to stoke it. "Besides, if you look at it from another perspective, even though this mark is here to stay, it represents the fact that I once protected a girl. And that girl will definitely remember me now. She'll never forget me for the rest of her life. Now that I think about it, it's actually quite..." Lawanchi showed him hard, suddenly furious. "So you are aware that she will never forget you for the rest of her life?" His jaw happened to land smack dab on Wei Wuxian's chest wound. Clutching his heart, Wei Wuxian shouted as he fell back on his buttocks. Lan Zhan! The pain was so intense it made him break out in a cold sweat. Groaning, he craned his neck up. Lan Zhan, you! What great grudge do you have against me? You're treating me like I killed your father. Wen Chao clenched his fists. A moment later, he relaxed, looking like he wanted to help Wei Wuxian up. But Wei Wuxian sat up by himself and shrank back, dodging him repeatedly. Okay, I know you don't like me, so I'll sit farther away. Don't come over and don't push me again, it hurts like hell. The wound was on his left side, so it began to hurt whenever he raised his left arm. Wei Wuxian shrunk to the side. Picking up the white clothes that had been torn into strips, he tossed them toward Wen Chao using his right hand. You can bind it yourself. I'm not gonna go over. Then he moved the clothes that he had taken off to the fire for them to dry up. A while had passed and neither had spoken. Wei Wuxian began again. Lan Zhan, you really are so strange today. You're so rude. And you aren't talking like yourself either. Wen Chao, if you don't have those intentions, then don't flirt with others. You're doing as you please, yet others will be in turmoil. Wei Wuxian, it's not like you're the one whom I'm flirting with, so it wouldn't be you who's in turmoil either. Unless... Wen Chao asked harshly. Unless what? Wei Wuxian, unless Lan Zhan, you like me, man. A moment later, Wen Chao replied in a cold voice. Please don't speak nonsense. Wei Wuxian, all right then, I'll speak one sense. Wen Chao, is it amusing? Trifling with empty words? Wei Wuxian, it's very amazing. But believe me, my words are as much as trifle as my moves are, which means not at all. Wen Chao muttered to himself, why am I sitting here having such a useless conversation with you? Somehow, Wei Wuxian had moved beside him again and sat down, speaking without a care for the consequences. Because it can't be helped. We're the only two unfortunate souls left in this place, right? If not me, who else are you gonna talk nonsense with? Wen Chao shot a look at Wei Wuxian, someone who never learned his lesson, someone who forgot all about pain once the wound had healed. Wei Wuxian was about to give him a cheeky grin when he suddenly saw Wen Chao lower his head. Wei Wuxian let out a horrible scream. Ah! Stop! Wen Chao had buried his face deep in the crook of Wei Wuxian's arm and lashed on with his teeth. Not only did he not stop when Wei Wuxian started screaming, he beat down even harder. Wei Wuxian, are you gonna stop? I'll kick you if you don't. Don't think that I won't kick you just because you're injured. Wei Wuxian, stop biting. I'll go away if you stop. I'll go away. Wei Wuxian, Lan Zhan, you're mad today. You're a dog. Stop biting. When Wen Chao had finally finished his feat and felt satisfied, Wei Wuxian sprang up and scrambled to the other side of the cave. Don't come over! Lan Zhan straightened his back slowly. Fixing his hair and his clothes, he spoke nothing, eyes looking down calmly. It was as if the certain someone who showed and shouted and sunk his teeth into other people's flesh had nothing to do with him. Wei Wuxian glanced at the bite marks on his arm and squatted down, still shaken. Curled up in the corner, he continued to poke at the flames, not at all comprehending the situation. How could Lan Zhan do this? Even though he saved me, you can say that I saved him as well, didn't I? It's not that I want him to thank me or anything, but why is it that we still can't be friends, even after so much has happened? Don't tell me that I'm really as annoying as Xiang makes it to be. Just as he was doubting himself, Lan Zhan spoke up. Thanks. Wei Wuxian thought that he heard wrong. He looked at Lan Zhan, who was also looking at him. In all seriousness, he repeated himself. Thanks. Seeing how he lowered his head slightly, Wei Wuxian was scared that he might worship him by kneeling. He quickly darted to the side. There's no need. There's a problem with me that I'm unable to stand it when others thank me, especially when people like you thank me so seriously. It's so creepy that I'm even getting goosebumps. Kneeling worship, of course, is even more so unnecessary. Lan Zhan replied with indifference. You're thinking too much. Even if I wanted to worship you, I would not be able to move. It seemed that he was finally back to normal, and he even thanked Wei Wuxian 2 times. Wei Wuxian was delighted that he couldn't help but want to move over again. He was the type of person who loved to be shoulder to shoulder with others, but the slight pain from the bite marks on his arm reminded him that Lan Zhan had just thrown a fit a moment ago, and maybe he'd be at it again just a moment later. He gained control of himself at once and stared at the black ceiling of the cave, speaking in a straight voice. Now that Xiang and the others escaped, it'd take them 1 or 2 days to go down the mountain. After they get down, they definitely return to whatever they live instead of reporting to the Wen sect. But since their swords were taken, I don't know how long it takes for them to find help. I'd say that we'll probably have to stay here underground for quite a while. We'd need to search for ways to solve a few issues. After a pause, he continued. The good thing is that the monster stays in the pool and doesn't chase after us. But the bad thing is also that it doesn't come out. With it guarding the hole under the pool, we won't be able to get out either. Lan Zhan. It is perhaps not a monster. What does it look like to you? Wei Wuxian. A tortoise? Lan Zhan. There is one divine creature that takes on such a form. Wei Wuxian. The divine beast, Xuanwu? The Xuanwu, also called the Nether Xuanwu, was a combination of turtle and snake. It was a water deity that dwelled in the North Sea. Since the Nether was also in the north, the creature was known as the god of the northern sky. Lan Zhan nodded. Wei Wuxian flashed his teeth. How can a divine beast look like this? It's got a mouthful of fangs and eats human flesh? It seems a bit too different from the legends. Lan Zhan. Of course it is not the proper divine Xuanwu. Rather, it is a semi-completed result of failing to rise to divinity and being transformed into a Yao. In other words, it is a deformed divine Xuanwu. Wei Wuxian. Deformed? Lan Zhan. I have read of it in an ancient text. 400 years ago, a fake Xuanwu appeared and rampaged amid Xiang. It was large in size and consumed live humans. One cultivator named it the Xuanwu of slaughter. Wei Wuxian. The creature that Wen Chao led us to hunt is a 400 years old beast? The Xuanwu of slaughter? Lan Zhan. Its size appears larger than what is recorded in the text, but it should be the one. Wei Wuxian. It's been 400 years already, so of course it has grown. Hadn't the Xuanwu of slaughter been killed back then? Lan Zhan. No. A few cultivators had joined alliance and prepared to kill it. But on one winter day that year, there happened to be very heavy snowfall and the weather was unusually cold. Then the Xuanwu of slaughter disappeared and was never seen again. Wei Wuxian. It was hibernating. After a pause, Wei Wuxian added, But even if it was hibernating, it didn't need to sleep for 400 years, did it? You said that the Xuanwu of slaughter eats live humans. Just how many has it eaten? Lan Zhan. The book records back then, whenever it appeared, the number of humans consumed ranged from hundreds to entire villages and cities. From the handful of times when it rampaged, it consumed at least 5,000 alive. Wei Wuxian. Oh, so it overate. The Yao beast seemed to enjoy dragging corpses back into its shell, though it was hard to tell whether it was stockpiling food or just wanted to savor them slowly. Perhaps it has amassed too much food in its shell all at once for centuries ago and had yet to digest all of it. Lan Zhan ignored him, but Wei Wuxian continued. Speaking of food, have you done Inadia before? Cultivators like us can go around 3 or 4 days without eating or drinking, but if no one comes to our rescue in a few days, we'll start getting weaker. It'll drain our physical strength, energy, and spiritual power. If Wen Chao and his people stood by and did nothing after their escape, it wouldn't be all that bad. The other families might bring reinforcements in a few days' time. The real danger was the Wen's refusing to provide timely aid, or worse, hitting them when they were down. The other families who might come to their rescue were really only the Lan clan of Guzu and the Jian clan of Yumeng. And if the Wens decided to obstruct them, then those few days would likely double. Wei Wuxian took back the branch and sketched out a map on the ground, linking a few places together. From Dusk Creek Mountain to Gusu is a bit shorter than from Dusk Creek Mountain to Yumeng. It's probably your sex people who will come first. Let's just be patient. Even if they don't come, the most that we'll have to wait is 1 or 2 days before Jiangshan arrives at Lotus Pier. Jiangshan is quite clever. The Wen sex people won't stop him. There's nothing to worry about. Lan Zhan's eyes were downcast. He seemed worn out as he whispered, "They will not come." Wei Wuxian. Lan Zhan. The cloud recesses has been burned down already. Wei Wuxian probed. Is everyone still there? Your father, your brother. He had thought that even if the leader of the Lan sect, Lan Wangji's father, was heavily injured, Lan Qiren and Lan Shichen would probably still be there to take control of the situation. Yet Lan Wangji's voice was monotone. Father is almost gone. Brother is missing. The branch that Wei Wuxian was scribbling on the ground with froze. When they were going up the mountain, the disciple said that the Lan sect's leader was heavily injured, but he never thought that the injuries were so heavy that the leader was almost gone. Maybe Lan Wangji himself just found out about it in the past few days, receiving news that his father was dying. Although the Lan sect's leader was practicing secluded meditation most of the time, minding nothing out of his own world, he was still Lan Wangji's father. And combined with the fact that Lan Shichen had gone missing, it was only natural that today Lan Wangji was especially gloomy and easily angered. Wei Wuxian immediately felt a sense of awkwardness and didn't know what to say. Yet, as he turned around amid the muddle, Wei Wuxian felt his entire body become paralyzed. The glow of the firelight reflected against Lan Wangji's face as though he was made of warm jade. It illuminated with utmost clarity the tear streaks that ran down his cheek as well. Wei Wuxian was shocked, speechless, thinking to himself, "Oh no!" With people like Lan Wangji throughout their entire lives, there would probably only be a handful of instances when they'd cry. And this time, he just so happened to have come upon one of those instances. He was someone who just couldn't look at other people cry. He couldn't stand the tears of women. Whenever he saw them cry, he'd want to go over and joke around so that he could make them laugh. The tears of men, though, were what he really couldn't stand. He had always felt that coming upon an instance when a man who was usually strong happened to cry was even scarier than accidentally seeing a chaste girl bathe. The thing was that he couldn't even comfort him. Under the blows of his residence being burned down, his sect being persecuted, his father dying, his brother gone missing, and he himself being injured, any sort of comfort would be pale and powerless. Wei Wuxian didn't know what to do, so he turned his head the other way. A while later, he spoke. Lan Zhan. Lan Wangji responded with coldness. Shut up. Wei Wuxian shut up. The fire cracked. Lan Wangji spoke quietly. Wei Ying, you really are an awful person. Wei Wuxian. Oh? He thought to himself. With so many things that have happened to him, Lan Zhan's mood is at its worst right now. But there's still me flashing around his side, so that's why he's so angry. He didn't have the energy to hit me because his leg is hurt, so he could only bite me. I guess I should leave him some peace and quiet. He held it in for a while, then added, It's not that I want to annoy you. I just wanted to ask if you're cold or not. The clothes have dried. You can have the undergarments. I'll keep the robe. The undergarments were what he wore next to his body. It never would have been suitable for Lan Wangji to wear. However, his robe was already hideously dirty. All of the Gusulan sect's people loved to be clean. Giving such an item of clothing to Lan Zhan seemed to be a bit offensive. Lan Zhan didn't say anything. He didn't look at him either. So Wei Wuxian tossed the white, dried-out undergarment toward him. He donned the robe himself and left in silence. The two waited for an entire 3 days. There was no sun or moon within the cave. They only knew that it had been 3 days because of the creepy sleep pattern of the Lan sect's people, sleeping and waking involuntarily when the times come. Thus, it must be possible to calculate the time from how many times Lan Zhan had slept. With the past 3 days of conserving energy, the injury of Lan Zhan's leg didn't worsen and was slowly healing. He was able to sit in the lotus position to meditate soon afterward. Within these days, Wei Wuxian had been flashing before his sight. After Lan Zhan returned to a calm state of mind and adjusted his mood, he was the poker-faced Lan Zhan once more. And so, Wei Wuxian finally returned as though nothing had happened, pretending with a thick face that he had seen and heard nothing on that night. With much discretion, he didn't tease him anymore either. The two's interaction were lukewarm, though peaceful. During the time, the two had scouted around the pool a couple of times. The Xuan of slaughter had already dragged all of the corpses into its shell. The large black shell floated in the water like a huge, impenetrable warship. In the beginning, heavy chewing noises often came from within. Later on, though, the noises ceased, replaced by what sounded like it was asleep and snoring. The snores were like roars of thunder. The two had thought about sneaking underwater while the beast was asleep to find the hole where they could escape. However, they could only roam underwater for 30 minutes before their movements were noticed by the beast. And although they had searched a few times, they couldn't find the hole that Xiang had mentioned. Wei Wuxian suspected that it might be covered up by a part of the beast's body. Though he wanted to lure it out of the water again, the beast seemed as though it became tired after the big ruckus and didn't want to move anymore. They gathered all of the arrows, bows, and iron rods that lay scattered on the shore and took them back to count. There were over 100 arrows, around 30 bows, and a little over 10 iron rods. This was already the 4th day. Lan Zhan picked up a bow with his left hand, attentively examining the material. His right hand strummed across the bowstring. It somehow managed to create the sonorous clang of metal. This was a weapon used by the cultivational world to hunt down beasts and demons. The material used for the bows and arrows were nothing of the norm. Lan Zhan broke off all the bowstrings from the bows and tied them from top to bottom into a long cord. With both hands he stretched the cord's taut and immediately flicked his wrists. The cord shot out as though it was lightning. The flash of white light flared across, and a rock 10 feet away was smashed into pieces. Lan Zhan retrieved the cord. The bowstring broke with a sharp cry through the air. Wei Wuxian. Cord assassination? The killing cord was a secret technique belonging to the Lan clan of Guzu, created and passed down by Lan Yi, the 3rd generation family head and granddaughter of the clan's founding father, Lan An. Lan Yi was also the only female family head of the Lan clan of Guzu. She cultivated with the Guqin, which had 7 strings that could be instantly disassembled and joined together. The 7 strings, arranged from thickest to thinnest, could play immaculate melodies under her soft snow-white fingers one moment and transform into a lethal weapon the next, slicing through bones and flesh like mud. Lan Yi originally created this skill to assassinate dissidents, which earned her quite a bit of criticism. The Lan clan of Guzu was itself ambivalent about this technique. But it was undeniable that the killing code was the most destructive of their secret techniques and one that was suited for use in both long range and close combat. Bridge from within, Lan Zhan stated. With a shell as solid as a fortress and incomparably tough skin, the Yao beast seemed impenetrable. But with such outer defenses, there was a high chance that the parts of its body hidden within its shell were vulnerable. The same thought had crossed Wei Wuxian's mind over the past few days, so he knew exactly what Lan Zhan was talking about. What he was even clearer about was their present situation. After 3 days of recuperation, their strength was now at its peak. But if they were to wait any longer, this optimal state would begin to deteriorate. Furthermore, the 4th day had passed and rescue still had not come. Rather than resign themselves to their fates and wait for death, they might as well fight with all they had. If both of them could join forces and slay this Xuanwu of slaughter, they could escape through the tunnel at the bottom of the Black Lake. I conquer. Breach from within, Wei Wuxian said. But I've heard about your family's killing code. The shell's interior is a confined space, not a venue conducive to using that skill to its full effect. Plus, the wound on your leg still hasn't healed. Won't it be hard to make this work? This was the truth, and Lan Zhan understood. They both knew that forcing themselves to do what they were incapable of doing would only drag the other down. Follow my lead, Wei Wuxian said. A little less than half the Xuanwu of slaughter's shell was still floating above the surface of the Black Lake. Its 4 limbs, its head, and its tail had all shrunk back into the shell. There was a large hole in front and 5 small holes on its left, right, and back. It looked like an isolated islet, a small mountain, its body pitch black and uneven, covered with moss and long hanging strands of dark algae. Carrying a bundle of arrows and branding irons on his back, Wei Wuxian soundlessly dove into the water like a slender minnow, swimming to the front of the shell where the Xuanwu of slaughter's head would be. Almost half the opening was submerged in the waters of the Black Lake, so Wei Wuxian followed the current and swam inside. After passing through, he hopped into the shell's interior and set both feet on the solid ground. It felt like he had stepped into thick, rotten, waterlogged mud. The acrid smell was so overwhelming it almost forced a curse from his mouth. The foul stench was rancid and cloyingly fishy. It reminded Wei Wuxian of a fat dead rat he'd once seen by a lake in Yumeng. Pinching his nose, he thought, "What an awful place! Thank goodness I didn't let Lan Zhan come in here. He would have puked on the spot at the stench with that sheltered life of his. And even if he didn't puke, he would have fainted for sure. The Schwanwurf snored softly. Wei Wuxian held his breath as he walked soundlessly, the soles of his boots sinking deeper and deeper. 3 steps later, the sludge had already risen above his knees. There seemed to be some hard lumps in the swamp. Wei Wuxian stooped a little, groped around, and unexpectedly touched something hairy. It felt like human hair. He withdrew his hand. That was surely one of the people of Schwanwurf slaughter had dragged in. He felt around some more and found a boot with half a leg inside, rotted to the point it was half flesh and half bone. This Yao beast clearly wasn't a big fan of cleanliness. Any leftovers or parts it didn't care to finish would fall through the gaps between its teeth and rot inside the shell. Over the centuries, it had all congealed into a thick sludge. Wei Wuxian was standing in a mire of death made of broken corpse limbs. Having crawled, fumbled, and tumbled all around over the past few days, he was already unbearably filthy. He couldn't have cared less about getting a bit messier. Offhandedly wiping his hands on his trousers, he continued onward. The Yao beast's snores increased in volume, and the blasts of air grew heavier. Even the mire of corpses beneath his feet was getting progressively thicker. At last, his hand lightly touched the uneven skin of the Yao beast. Following the skin, he slowly felt his way inside. As expected, the head and neck were covered with scales. Further down the neck was tough, bumpy skin. Even further beyond that, the skin grew thinner and more fragile. By now, the mire of corpses had reached Wei Wuxian's waist. The majority of the corpses here had not been fully eaten, and the remaining parts were in bigger chunks. No longer mire but a mound. Wei Wuxian reached behind his back to retrieve the arrows and branding irons, only to realize that the rods were caught on something. He gripped the shafts and yanked hard before he managed to get them loose. In the process, the front end of one of the branding irons pried something out of the fleshy corpse mound, and it made a muffled clank as it fell. Wei Wuxian instantly stilled. When there was no movement around him and the Yao beast didn't lash out, Wei Wuxian soundlessly heaved a sigh of relief. One of the branding irons got stuck on something. Based on the sound, it was metal and long. Let's see if it's anything useful. I'm short on weapons, so it'd be awesome if it's a top-grade spiritual sword. He reached out and touched the object that had fallen. It was long and blunt, and rust crawled along its surface. The instant he grasped it, screams filled his ears. It sounded like thousands upon thousands of people wailing in despair. In a split second, a chill shot up his arm and traveled through the rest of his body. Wei Wuxian jolted and jerked his hand back. What the heck is this? What strong resentment! Just then, his surroundings suddenly lit up. A faint reddish-yellow glow cast Wei Wuxian's shadow and illuminated the pitch-black iron sword in front of him. The sword was thrust at an oblique angle into his shadow, embedded right where his heart would be. But this was inside the shell of the Xuanyu of slaughter. How was there light? Wei Wuxian whirled around. As he expected, a pair of large golden eyes were only a stone's throw away from him. It was then that he realized those muffled, thunderous snows had gone silent, and the faint reddish-yellow glow was coming from the eyes of the Xuanyu of slaughter. The Xuanyu of slaughter bared its snaggled black and yellow fangs and roared. Wei Wuxian, standing right in front of its mouth, was assailed head-on by the acoustic power of that roar. It hit him with such force that his eardrums almost ruptured and his entire body cried out in pain. Seeing those gaping jaws coming for him, he hastily shoved the bundle of branding irons into its mouth. The timing and position were perfect. He wedged them between the owl beast's upper and lower jaw, not a second late or an inch short. Now that the Yao beast couldn't close its mouth, Wei Wuxian stabbed a bundle of arrows into the thinnest and weakest part of its skin. Although the arrows were slim, he'd bundled 5 apiece into one. He stabbed them so deep into the Yao beast's flesh that even the fleshing was buried. It was like he'd pierced it with a poison needle. Racked by the intense pain, the Xuanyu of slaughter clamped down so hard on the branding irons, holding its mouth open, that they bent, folding into curled hooks. Wei Wuxian stabbed a few more bundles of arrows into its soft skin. Never in its life had the Yao beast known such grief. It went mad with pain, its serpentine body flailing hard inside the shell while its head thrashed. The mire of corpses also roiled and swirled, and the wave of putrid sludge almost engulfed Wei Wuxian entirely. The Xuanyu of slaughter widened both hideously yellow eyes and opened its jaws wide, as if it intended to swallow mountains and rivers in one gulp. The mire of corpses slushed into its mouth like a mighty flood. Wei Wuxian struggled desperately against the current, grabbing the hilt of an iron sword in its attempts. His mind went still and cold for a second before those piercing wails and screams filled his ears once more. The Xuanyu of slaughter had already sucked Wei Wuxian's body into its mouth. Seeing the Yao beast was about to chomp down, he grabbed the hilt of the iron sword and repeated the same trick as before, jamming it between the beast's upper and lower jaws. The innards of centuries-old Yao beasts like this one were normally very corrosive. If a human were swallowed, they'd instantly be dissolved into nothing but smoke. Wei Wuxian firmly gripped the hilt of the iron sword, which wedged the creature's jaws open. The Xuanyu of slaughter thrashed its head around for a while, unable to swallow the obstruction that prevented it from closing its mouth, but still refusing to relax its bite and let go. And finally, at long last, it charged out of its shell. Having grown fearful of being stabbed by Wei Wuxian inside its shell, it did its utmost to squeeze its whole body outside as if to escape. And so the tender flesh once concealed under scary armor was now exposed. Lan Zhan, who had been waiting for a long time for this moment, had already lowered the bowstring into position above the shell's head hole. The moment the Xuanyu of Slaughter charged out, he reeled the bowstring back and stretched it tight. He strummed the string, causing it to vibrate and slice into the beast's flesh. Under the combined efforts of the two, the Yao beast could neither advance nor retreat. Being a malformed Yao rather than a real divine beast, it had never been very intelligent to begin with, and now it was completely mad with pain. It failed its head and tail as it barged violently around the black lake, raising mighty waves and thrashing whirlpools into being. But no matter how much it rampaged, one youth that it could not bite nor devour was firmly wedged on its mouth, and the other youth was strangling its vital point with a bowstring, cutting into where its skin was thinnest inch by inch. The deeper it cut, the more blood gushed forth. Lan Zhan kept the string yanked tight and taut, not loosening his grip for a single second. This went on for 6 hours. After 6 hours, the Xuanyu of Slaughter finally slowed, and then its movements stopped completely. The Yao beast's neck was almost entirely severed by Lan Zhan's bowstring. Having overexerted himself, Lan Zhan's palms were also covered in wounds and drenched in fresh blood. The colossal shell floated on the surface of the Black Lake's waters, which were now visibly dyed purplish red. The coppery stench was so thick that the scene seemed like a bloody punishment arena from purgatory. Plop! Lan Zhan jumped into the water and swam to the beast's head. The eyes of the Xuanyu of Slaughter were still wide open, but its pupils had already glazed over. Its jaw, however, was still tightly clenched shut. "Wei!" Lan Zhan called out. There was only silence from within the Yao beast's mouth. Lan Zhan reached out at once, grabbing the 2 rows of fangs and forcing them apart. Swimming in water without anything that he could use to support himself, he could only open them after straining for quite a while. Inside, he saw a black iron sword stuck within the mouth of the beast. Both the tip and the handle had pierced deep into its flesh. The blade had already been forced into a curvature. Wei Wuxian's entire body was curled up in the shape of a shrimp. Head facing down, his hands still clenched into the not-so-sharp blade of the sword. He had almost slit into the throat of the Xuanyu. Lan Zhan grabbed his lapel at once and pulled him out. As soon as the Xuanyu's jaws loosened, the iron sword slipped into the water and sunk to the bottom. Eyes tightly shut, Wei Wuxian lay limply over Lan Zhan's body, one arm around his shoulder. Holding his waist, Lan Zhan floated over the bloody water with him. "Wei!" His hands trembled slightly. Just as he was about to touch Wei Wuxian's cheek, Wei Wuxian suddenly shivered and woke up. "What's happening? What's happening? Is it dead? Is it dead?" He flopped lightly, causing both of their bodies to sink deeper into the water. Lan Zhan's arm tightened around his waist. "It is." Wei Wuxian's gaze was blank, as though he had trouble realizing what was going on. He only replied after thinking for a while. "It's dead? It's dead? Great, it's dead! Early on it kept on screaming as it rolled around, and then I fainted. All right, the hole underwater. Quick, let's go. Let's get out through the hole. Lan Zhan sensed that his behavior was strange. What's wrong? Wei Wuxian was suddenly energetic. Nothing! Let's get out as soon as possible. There's no time to lose. There was indeed no time to lose. Lan Zhan nodded. I'll take you. Wei Wuxian. There's no need. Yet Lan Zhan's right arm was still wrapped like an iron belt around his waist, stating in an irrefutable tone. Breathe in. Going underwater in such a daze was probably not the best idea. Wei Wuxian didn't like to force himself either and nodded. The two took in a deep breath and dove into the water. A moment later, 2 splashes bursted from the purple-red water. The two slunk out again. Wei Wuxian spat out a mouthful of the bloody water and wiped his face, covering it with the purplish red. He looked even worse than before. What's wrong? Why isn't there a hole? Xiang had indeed said that there was a hole in the bottom of the pool able to let half a dozen people pass through at once, and the other disciples did indeed already escape from the hole. Wei Wuxian had originally thought that it couldn't be found because it was blocked by the Xuanwu's body, but the corpse of the Xuanwu was already in a different place, yet there was still no hole where its body used to be. Water dripped down Lan Zhan's wet hair. He didn't answer. The two looked at each other. Both thought of a daunting possibility. It was likely that, under the intense pain, when the Xuanwu of slaughter was madly waving its limbs, it either shook the underwater rocks or kicked into a certain place, coincidentally causing the only hole that they could escape from to be blocked. Wei Wuxian struggled out of Lan Zhan's arm. He plunged into the water. Lan Zhan followed. Yet, after searching for a long while, they still couldn't find any holes. Not even one that could let a single person through. Wei Wuxian. What do we do now? After a while of silence, Lan Zhan replied. Let's go up first. Wei Wuxian waved his hands. Let's go up. Both were drained of all energy. They swam slowly toward the shore. When they rose out of the water, both were covered in a bloody shade of purple. Wei Wuxian took off his clothes, wringing them dry and flinging them around in the air. He couldn't help but curse. Are we being toyed with or what? I was thinking that if nobody came to help us, we wouldn't be able to kill it even if we wanted to. And that was why I went for it. And now we finally have it dead, and the son of a bitch made the hole collapse. Fuck. Hearing the fuck, Lan Zhan's brows twitched. He wanted to say something, but held it in. Wei Wuxian flung his clothes around as he cursed. Suddenly his legs gave out. Lan Zhan lunged forward in time to catch him. Leaning against his hand, Wei Wuxian spoke. It's fine. Used up all my energy. All right, Lan Zhan. Did you see that I was holding a sword when I was in its mouth? Where did the sword go? Lan Zhan. It sank underwater. Is there anything about it? Wei Wuxian. It sank? Never mind then. When he was clutching onto the sword, he kept on hearing a deluge of screams beside his ears. His body felt cold and his head spun. The iron sword must have been something special. The Xuanwei of slaughter had consumed at least 5,000 people. When the people were dragged into its shell, bodies still intact, there had to be some that were still alive. The sword might have belonged to a cultivator who had been eaten. It had been hidden for at least 400 years within the corpse mound of the shell. Tainted with the pain and resentment of countless humans, both dead and alive, it had heard their screams. Wei Wuxian had wanted to keep the sword and examine the iron properly. Now that it had sunk, however, and they were stuck here unable to escape, it seemed appropriate to let the matter drop. If he mentioned it too much and Lan Zhan picked up on what he was getting at, they'd be at odds with each other all over again. Wei Wuxian waved his hands. There really isn't anything good about this, is there? He continued to drag his legs forward. Lan Zhan followed behind him in silence. A few steps later, Wei Wuxian's legs gave out again, and Lan Zhan caught him again. This time, he put one hand against his forehead. After contemplating for a few moments, he spoke. Wei, you are so warm. Wei Wuxian put his hand to his forehead as well. Lan Zhan, you're also really warm. Lan Zhan took his hand away, speaking in a tepid tone. That's because your hand is cold. Wei Wuxian, I think I do feel a bit dizzy. About 4 to 5 days ago, he put all of the herbs in the perfume sachet onto Lan Zhan's leg. He only wiped the brand mark on his chest a few times. In the past few days, he hadn't rested well, and he had just been rummaging through the corpse mound and the pool water. His injury had finally worsened. Wei Wuxian had a fever. After managing for a while, Wei Wuxian felt dizzier and dizzier. He couldn't walk any longer, so he decided to just sit down where he was, musing. How could I get a fever so easily? I haven't gotten fever in years. Lan Zhan didn't feel like expressing his opinion on the so easily part of his words. Lie down. Wei Wuxian did as he was told. Lan Zhan took his hand and began to pass him spiritual energy. Though he had been lying for a while, Wei Wuxian soon sat up again. Lan Zhan told him, Lie down properly. Wei Wuxian drew his hand back. You don't need to give me any. You don't have much left yourself. Lan Zhan grabbed his hand again and repeated, Lie down properly. A few days ago, Lan Zhan was drained of energy and got both scared and teased by him. This time, it was Wei Wuxian's turn to be drained of energy for him to do whatever he wanted. But even when lying down, Wei Wuxian didn't like loneliness. Soon afterward, he began to complain. It's too hard, it's too hard. Lan Zhan, what do you want? Wei Wuxian, I want to lie somewhere else. Lan Zhan, where would you want to lie at such a place? Wei Wuxian, let me borrow your lap for a while, won't you? Lan Zhan spoke with an expressionless face. Stop fooling around. Wei Wuxian,
I'm serious. My head is so dizzy. You're not a girl. Why can't I borrow it for a bit?
Lan Zhan,
even if I'm not a girl, you cannot just lie on it.
Seeing that he began to frown, Wei Wuxian responded,
I'm not fooling around. You're the one who should stop fooling around. I refuse to accept this. Lan Zhan, tell me why.
Lan Zhan,
what why?
Wei Wuxian managed to flip around and lay his stomach down on the ground.
Of all the other people, there isn't anyone who doesn't secretly like me despite saying that I'm annoying. Why is it that whenever it's you, you never give me any good looks? We count as having lived through death with each other, don't we? You don't even want to lend your lap for me to lie on, and you're lecturing me again. Are you an old man or what?
Lan Zhan replied with a thin voice,
You're delirious.
Perhaps he was indeed delirious. Not long after, Wei Wuxian had fallen asleep. When he was sleeping, he felt that his lying position wasn't too bad. It seemed that he really was lying on someone's lap. A cold hand rested over his forehead. It felt quite comfortable. Happily, he rolled around as much as he wanted to, and there wasn't anybody who scolded him. When he rolled onto the ground, his head was gently stroked before he was picked up and put into the lap again. But when he woke up, he was still lying on the ground. What had replaced the lap was a pile of leaves behind his head, which felt somewhat better than before. Lan Zhan was sitting quite a distance away from him. A fire had been restarted. The firelight reflected against his cheeks as though he was jade, warm and gentle. Wei Wuxian thought to himself, Of course it was a dream. The path that the two had wanted to escape through was severed. Stuck within the cave, they had to wait for the human insect to rescue them and spent 2 more days. Within the 2 days, Wei Wuxian had always been under a low fever, sleeping before waking before sleeping again. It all depended on Lan Zhan to pass him spiritual energy that he could manage to maintain his current condition and ensure that it didn't worsen.
Wei Wuxian, it's so boring. It really is so boring. It's too quiet. I'm hungry. Lan Zhan, why don't you get up and make me something? Make me some of that tortoise meat. Never mind. I'd rather not. The meat of man-eating beasts, like this one, is definitely rotten. You shouldn't move after all. Why are you like this, Lan Zhan? You're so boring. Your mouth is closed and your eyes are closed. You don't talk to me and you don't look at me. Are you insane or are you a monk or something? Right, you found really was a monk. I forgot.
Lan Zhan,
be quiet. You're still fevered. Don't talk. Conserve your energy.
Wei Wuxian,
you finally responded to me. How many days have we been waiting for? Why hasn't anyone come to rescue us yet?
Lan Zhan,
it hasn't even been 1 day.
Wei Wuxian covered his face.
Why is it so difficult? It must be because I'm with you. Xiang should have been the one who stayed. Even arguing with him would be more interesting than being like this with you. Xiang, where the hell are you? It's almost been 7 days.
Lan Zhan stabbed a branch into the fire, somehow managing to give it the air of a sword. Spreading everywhere, the sparks danced through the air. He spoke coldly. "Rest." Wei Wuxian curled up into a shrimp again, facing him. "Are you serious? I just woke up and you're telling me to rest? Do you really hate seeing the awake version of me so much?" Taking the branch away, Lan Zhan replied calmly, "You're thinking too much." Wei Wuxian: "Absolutely nothing works on him. He is not at all as interesting as how he was few days ago. Face as dark as the bottom of a pan, speaking with actual tone, even biting others would he was mad. But one shouldn't hope to see such a Lan Zhan so easily. I probably wouldn't be able to see it again until the end of my life." He spoke. "I'm so bored, Lan Zhan. Let's chat. You can start." Lan Zhan: "When did you usually sleep?" Wei Wuxian: "Your start is so boring. It's so dry that it really makes me not to want to continue. But I'm still gonna give you some face and continue. Let me tell you, in Lotus Pier, I've never slept before 1 in the morning. I often stayed up all night." Lan Zhan: "Improper conduct, a bad habit." Wei Wuxian: "You think that everyone is like your sex people?" Lan Zhan: "It needs to stop." Wei Wuxian covered his ears. "I'm sick. I'm feverish. Brother, can't you say something nicer and make poor me feel better?" Nothing came out of Lan Zhan's closed mouth. Wei Wuxian: "You don't know what to say? Fine, I should have known. Then, if you don't know what to say, can you sing? How about you sing a song?" It had originally been an offhand remark. He was chatting with Lan Zhan to pass the time and didn't at all expect him to agree. Yet, after a few moments of silence, a low yet mild voice echoed softly through the hollow cave. Lan Zhan really did begin to sing. Wei Wuxian closed his eyes, turned around and spread out his limbs. "It sounds nice," he asked. "What's it called?" Lan Zhan seemed to murmur something. Wei Wuxian opened his eyes. "What was it called again?"